When countries grew nationalistic and proud, all they craved for was power, dominance, and more followers. In order to adhere to these desires, countries turned to imperialism, which is the act of a stronger country taking over a weaker country. The primary target for the imperialists was Africa, due to its richness in materials and the possibility of conquering lands. During the age of imperialism, countries colonized other countries, which is an act that, physically, brought the world population, as well as the countries, closer together. For instance, the map of the world in 1898 shows how close these countries grew. The British Empire controlled countries ranging from Canada all the way to Australia. Take a look at the continent of Africa. Countries from all over the world were brought closely together on a single continent, which greatly promotes the ideals of a globalized world. The closer the countries are, physically, technologically, and industrially, the more supportive they are of globalization. Furthermore, the idea of African cultures mixing with European and other foreign cultures is greatly supportive of globalization. Countries become closer, and people share new ideas. Although a sense of national pride was involved with the act of imperializing, it is clear that the age of imperialism promoted the globalization of the world by bringing countries closer together. As the various parts of the world competed for dominance and more land, alliances and rivalries began to form, which led to an earth-rattling war that would both promote and hinder globalization. The Allies, Russia, France, and Great Britain, and the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, were greatly against one another, which just about divided the world into two areas. The idea of separation and fatal rivalry contradicts the ideals of globalization. However, one may argue that the togetherness of the Allied countries canceled out the rivalries of the enemy countries in terms of hindering or promoting globalization. In other words, within these two halves of the world, countries were even closer than before, as they struggled together to win the war. Although World War I, also known as the Great War, was one of the most tragic wars the world has yet to see, there were several improvements in the globalizing of the world. Many improvements in globalization involved the field of technology. The idea of going to war led to many new inventions and innovations that would possibly help the soldiers in combat. One of these major innovations included the airplane. At the start of the war, airplanes had been fairly new, but once countries realized that airplanes could be used to their advantage, they quickly began to develop higher-speed planes that would shoot ammunition and drop bombs. Other innovations included poison gas, the machine gun, the tank, and the submarine. A large part of globalization involves advancement in technology and science. World War I brought forth many innovations in many fields, which boosted the technological advancement of the entire world. The time frame between World War I and World War II, known as the interwar period, was a time that, once again, hindered the globalization of the world. The first portion of the interwar period was the rise of fascism, which is a form of government focused on harsh and extreme nationalistic beliefs. For example, a fascist figure such as Adolf Hitler would promote people of his own kind and encourage the persecution against those who were not, as was the case in the Holocaust. The main goal of fascism was to spread one's own nationalistic beliefs across the world while accepting no other beliefs or cultures. Clearly, this is a goal that goes against the ideals of globalization, because it is contradictory to the togetherness of the world. Being fascist meant acting against other parts of the world that are not a part of one's culture or nationality, and hence temporarily destroying the proper relationships that countries once shared. In the year 1929, the Great Depression hit not only the United States, but also the majority of the world. During this time, states possessed little money. Some had such low dollar counts that food prices multiplied by the millions. People grew hungry, families starved, and countries grew poor. Without money, it is nearly impossible for innovations to occur, and this is precisely the reason as to why the Great Depression hindered the globalization of the world. The interwar period ended with the beginning of World War II, when globalization was both hindered and promoted. Just as in World War I, World War II led to several major technological advances in the fields of weaponry. For example, the first atomic bomb was detonated in the year of 1945. It can be argued that any advancement in technology promotes globalization, as other countries have the ability to observe the advancement and bring the information to their own lands. Additionally, Allied countries grew close to one another, which meant more togetherness in the world. However, World War II also hindered globalization. As was the case with World War I, the world was separated into two opposing halves, which slowed down the process of globalization. Germany was one of the major countries to participate in the Second World War, and once its Chancellor, Adolf Hitler, came into power, a new era would arise and once again slow down globalization. Hitler spread anti-Semitic beliefs across Europe, especially in Germany, and this led to the period known as the Holocaust. The Holocaust was an act of genocide against the Jewish people, as well as others who were not quote-unquote Aryan. Hitler wanted the entire world to be Aryan, and all others who did not fit this category would be unfit to live. Hitler was a fascist, and, as was stated earlier, fascism hindered globalization. The idea of murdering tens of millions of people from other parts of the world is completely contradictory to the ideals of globalization, which include countries coexisting with other countries. Finally, after all of these historical events, the world was divided into two sections. Many parts of the world supported communism, while many others supported capitalism. Both of these forms of economic structure wanted their beliefs to dominate in the world, and thus came the 50-year battle known as the Cold War. Although this was a period in which the world was divided, it also promoted the globalization of the countries. Opposing countries may have, by definition, been against one another, but at the same time, countries that were supportive of one another were brought even closer. Imagine having half of the world share a common economic structure. The acts of brinkmanship, when countries went to the brink of attacking but never actually attacked, may have slowed down the process of globalization. However, the communists were drawn closer to the other communists, and the capitalists were drawn closer to the other capitalists. Now, the viewer of this video is probably thinking the following. If so many of the events in history hindered globalization, then how is it even arguable to say that history has promoted it? The answer to this question relates to the levels of increased and hindered globalization in the various parts of history. In other words, those events that promoted globalization outweighed those that hindered it. This conclusion can be made for several reasons. First, one must address the fact that globalization is constantly progressing, whether it is hindered or not. A hindered globalization is a slower yet still progressive globalization. Second, one should realize that the historical periods of nationalism, the Great War, the interwar period, World War II, and the Holocaust hindered globalization only by slowing it down, not by completely stopping it, because countries were still advancing in technology, and were still searching for innovation and improvement. Given this information, one may conclude that the events that promoted globalization gave it an extra boost. To summarize what was just said in one sentence, hindering events slowed down globalization, while promoting events sped it up. Finally, the third and possibly most important piece of evidence that Globalization 2.0 supported a globalized world can be found in today's societies. The United States has connections with numerous countries across the globe. Economies are dependent on one another. People travel across oceans on airplanes. Cars are produced by the millions, and endless more innovations exist today, May of 2011, due in part to Globalization 2.0's support of a globalized world.